belief. Today you find that Nimrod is worshipped in various symbolic forms in places such as the Bohemian Grove, in which the owl, or which is a symbol of Moloch, basically is transformed as a particular type of sun god, and many people engage in that particular type of worship. We'll come to that in a minute. But as I stated, if you look at these mother goddesses in histories, all the attributes, for example, that the Babylonians gave to Queen Semiramis, that's this lady here. This is Queen Semiramis, with the child conceived through miraculous means, through the virgin birth. That particular lady was called in history in certain accounts as Virgin Mother, Queen of Heaven, Our Lady, which translates as Madonna. In other words, if you heard of the Madonna of the Rocks, the actual painting by Da Vinci, and the Notre Dame, and later on those particular writings were transferred into the myths which were created surrounding the Virgin Mary. The Ubaid culture, as I stated previously, worshipped a certain people, and as I showed earlier on, the reptilian mother and child were found in the grave when they were being dug up by respective archaeologists. Unraveling the specific story is fascinating when you begin to realize that the so-called different gods and goddesses around the world are essentially the same deity. Queen Semiramis and Mother Goddess worship, you find the same thing in India. You find the Mother Goddess here, Devkasi, with the infant Krishna, again through virgin birth. You find similar accounts, the Egyptian goddess Isis and the son Horus. Here you find the Roman Catholic Mary and the incarnate God Jesus, and so on. These were different goddesses in Ephesus. But the point is that there are parallels. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a particular kind of a common consciousness amongst various civilizations where they incorporate these particular beliefs, and you find the parallels throughout history. So-called Virgin Marys in prehistory. Scandinavia, you had Disa with a virgin child, conceived with a virgin birth. In Egypt, Isis and the child Osiris. In India, Krishna and Devkasi. In Asia, Cybele and Dionysus. In Rome, you have the mother goddess Fortuna and Jupiter Pio, also all conceived by a virgin birth. In Greece, you have Ceres. You heard the fruit juice Ceres, or Irene with a baby boy Plutus, all again conceived through miraculous means. Virgin Marys in prehistory, as I'd like to call them. Again, transposed, cross-pollinated, and people adopt these particular ideas and they incorporate these myths, and you create a religion out of it. In fact, even in places like Tibet, China, and Japan, when Jesuit missionaries entered these particular regions during the part of the 20th century, they were astonished to find the Roman counterpart of the Madonna and the child, what the Chinese and the Japanese called Xingmu, the Holy Mother. The Holy Mother was portrayed with a child in her arms and glory around her, like the halo, which I'll also show further on in the particular diagrams, as you will see. And so, largely based on these particular parallels, many researchers, including people such as S. Acharya, in a book, The Christ Conspiracy, people like Bruce Bauer and so on, they argued that in actual fact the true founder of Christianity was an Alexandrian Jew called Philo. And so these particular writers, of course we don't agree with them, but as a result of the conclusions they've reached, they've stated that this particular Jesus was a fiction. It was a fiction, he didn't exist, he was something which was developed at a later point in time. Interestingly enough, this was what I had mentioned earlier on, the Bohemian Grove, which is a forest in a part in California. It's a forest, about 100-acre wood in California, which is privately owned. And in 2000, we had the investigative journalist Alex Jones. This particular discussion was dealt with in a documentary called The Secret Rulers of the World. And he infiltrated this particular area, and in that space, what he came across was the same, in a sense, the same pagan sun worship, the same Babylonian pagan sun worship, he found the existence at that particular time in these particular areas. For example, this was what we call the cremation of Ke. Here we have a picture of an owl, a statue of a 14-foot owl, which symbolized Nimrod, who was also the sun god, being worshipped. And of course you have an effigy of burning that takes place. Again, some kind of obeisance, if I may state, or significance in terms of worship of the pagan sun gods. And when you look at the history of that, you find there's not much difference in respect of how Jesus in the New Testament has been reconstructed. But interestingly enough, who are some of the attendees at these particular functions? We have here, Nixon, Reagan, and Glenn Seaborg, who was a founder of plutonium. Here we have an image which took place in 1957. Again, this particular festival, which takes place in July, where the worship of the pagan sun god, or allegedly, if you look at many mainstream journalists, they will tell you, well, this is just some kind of boys club, like the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University and so on. But this was an image which was captured in 1957. This was about more than 20 years before Reagan became president, and at least more than a decade before Nixon became president. And standing up there was Glenn Seaborg, who was a founder of plutonium, the actual bomb which was utilized, in fact, to cause the devastation in Hiroshima, leading to the deaths and mass murders of close to 1 million people. But the point is, you find, as a passing remark, these are the type of attendees that you have at conferences and functions such as this. So Jesus the myth, as I've stated, based on what I've produced, as a result of these parallels, many have doubted of the existence, the historical existence of Jesus Christ. Rudolf Bultmann, in 1941, he wrote a book called The Problem of Demythologizing the New Testament. And what he basically stated was, he called on interpreters to replace the traditional theology of the New Testament with the works and the writings of a philosopher called Martin Heidegger, because he saw parallels there. You find Joseph Welles in his book in 1930 called Forgery in Christianity went even further and stated that there was an active effort to forge documents. There was an active effort to forge documents and to make the myth seem as historical, beginning as early as the 2nd century. You go on further, John Allegro, who was a translator of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he was subsequently brutally murdered based on his ideas. In 1970, he proposed that Christianity was something which was a shamanistic religion based on the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Now, if you look at the shamans, the so-called witch doctors or the Sangomas, he stated that this basically evolved out of a combination of Gnosticism that was basically floating around. And so Jesus never existed. This is his idea based on the myth. Bertrand Russell stated, a philosopher that existed, that if Christ existed, which we know of, which we doubt, we know very little of him. Based on the New Testament account, the New Testament account, more often than not, is a copy of all these ancient texts. And Max Muller argued that the story of Christ evolved in mythic origins of the birth, death, and rebirth of the sun god. Sun god worship, as I will illustrate. You see, there was a particular belief. If you go to Europe, we don't experience it here in South Africa, or of course Mafeking, but if you go to Europe and you look at the winter, or certainly in the extreme north, in ancient times, as a result of the winter solstice, that period prior to the 25th of December was exceptionally cold and exceptionally dark. And after the 25th of December, you found the rebirth of the sun. In a manner of speaking, the sun comes again and then it goes to the cycles. So based on that, they're saying this kind of rebirth, death, and rebirth was modeled around belief in the pagan sun. And of course, those who basically worship the sun personified the sun in many forms. And based on that, we find that many of these aspects of the story of Jesus have parallel with the death, rebirth of the sun. Certain pagans, such as Dionysus and so on, This was a particular example, ancient drawing which was done in, I believe, the 1600s or 1700s. Bacchus, the pagan sun god, and Ariadne in a battle. This is another more common picture of Bacchus, the pagan sun god. Here you find him surrounded by grapes. And in fact, if you look at the same, one of the miracles that Bacchus performed was that he somehow or the other transformed water into wine. And I think I heard that somewhere else before. Because you look at the Gospel of John, at the wedding feast of Cana in Galilee, the same myth occurs where Jesus transforms water into wine. This was one of his main features, over above many that we'll basically see. You have Dionysus, again another pagan sun god, another form of Bacchus which was worshipped at a different point in time. And again the same principle applies. Pagan sun gods, born on the 25th of December, died, were crucified, and had many parallels, which of course epitomize what we find in the New Testament. Attis of Phrygia, another pagan sun god. To give just a practical illustration of these two ancient sun gods, Attis of Phrygia and Dionysus of Bacchus. Look at their parallels. Attis, born on the 25th of December of the Virgin Nana, considered the Savior who was slain for mankind. His body was symbolized as bread and eaten by worshippers. You find the same thing in churches today, in many Catholic churches, where the bread is in a sense viewed as the body of Christ and the wine is viewed as the blood of Christ. He was both the divine Son and the Father. On Black Friday, he was crucified on a tree. He descended into the underworld and was resurrected on March 25th as the Most High God. Amazing. And what about Dionysus, born on the 25th of December as a holy child, was placed in a manger? He was a traveling teacher who performed many miracles. His body was symbolized as bread. He was a god of wine and turned water into wine. He was called King of Kings and considered only begotten Son, Savior, Redeemer, and the Alpha and Omega. Again, he was identified with the Lamb. I think I heard that somewhere else before. And so what then happened was that on all these particular accounts in 1977, you had a team of 7 British theologians. They compiled and edited a work which was edited by John Hick. It was called The Myth of God Incarnate. The Myth of God Incarnate. And they argue, and I give a quotation, they state, New Testament scholarship has shown how fragmentary and ambiguous. Of course, if you don't understand it, question time, you're willing to ask on this particular issue. Are the data available to us as we try to look back across 19.5 centuries? And at the same time, how large and variable is the contribution of the imagination to our pictures of Jesus? The metaphysical uniqueness of Jesus, as traditionally taught, has always been taken to have carried with it a unique moral perfection. He goes on, he says, it is impossible to justify any such claim on purely historical grounds, however wide the net of evidence is cast. So far as the Gospels are concerned, he states, the material in them is too scanty and too largely selected and unorganized with reference to other considerations to provide any evidence in respect of the historical Jesus. And so that's why you had mythic inventions. Emeritus George Albert Wells said Jesus was a mythic invention. And so many people, of course, there is a small segment of scholars that believe Jesus is a myth. The vast majority don't, but they've got some kind of justification for their particular belief. This was a good diagram of Horus, the sun god. Again, you can see, interestingly, the halo. This is a halo, and the half-bird, half-man picture of Horus. This is another diagram of the Emperor Horus, the sun god, again surrounded by what we see here as the all-seeing one eye, something which we find in many parts of the world today. And again, we have a list here of the world's crucified saviors. Who are they? I was quite surprised to know that Krishna, if you look at the certain accounts in the Mahabharata and the Upanishads, was also viewed as crucified or assassinated or slain. Buddha, Ixion, Hercules, Hesus, Heracles, Attis, Tammuz, which we discussed, Adonis, Mithra, Quetzalcoatl, Odin, Horus, and of course the god Prometheus. Again, all these are pagan sun gods. They were of course also crucified, subject to being crucified. And as I mentioned earlier on, the so-called widespread myth of Osiris Dionysus was consistently located. It was subsequently merged with local deities in that particular area. So you find that how is it possible at different points in time you find the same kind of story about different gods and goddesses with the same particular belief? It's because of the so-called spread of cultures and intermingling of cultures and civilizations. So you find the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Sumerians and the Khazar community and so on. They have these particular ideas and views and beliefs. Horus, as I mentioned, gained his authority by being anointed by Anubis. In fact, he was also described as Horus Karast. Tom Harper, who's a professor of New Testament studies in the United States, stated that the word Karast, in fact, is a corrupted form of the word Messiah, anointed. Horus Karast, the anointed one. Anointed by who? By Anubis. Again, another pagan sun god. In the 1700s, you find that when there were these expeditions that took place to parts of South America, the Spaniards came across the Aztecs. When you look at the expeditions of Hernan Cortez, a great explorer, he came to South America and he found that the Aztecs were worshipping Quetzalcoatl, another pagan sun god. And somehow or the other, because of their ignorance, they were of the belief that these particular parallels were as a result of a demonic imitation of Christianity. Whereas in actual fact, it predated Christianity. It predated the existence of Jesus. It came long before his time. And so that evolved at a particular context. And again, surprisingly, you look at many of these diagrams in the world. This is an image of a halo. This is an explorer in the North Pole. There's a beautiful picture, if it's clear to you guys, surrounded by the halo. And when you look at religious diagrams, you find again pictures of the halo. Here we find Saint Peter and the sun wheel halo surrounding him. Again, symbolic of the pagan sun god. You find here the Tower of Aachen Cathedral in Germany. Again, the all-seeing one eye and the sun, illustration of the sun. You find further on here, what is this? That's a $1. The all-seeing eye on the $1 bill. And note the halo. Again the halo, again, and it's got the pyramid without the, of course, the pinnacle on the top. You see the kind of pyramid without the pinnacle, the all-seeing one eye surrounded by the halo. Norvis Ordo Seclorum. Again the halo, symbolizing Egyptian sun worship, Egyptian pagan worship. This was a diagram which was done by Leonardo da Vinci. In fact, if you look at some of the uncolored diagrams which were done, some of the illustrations, and you will clearly see that behind Jesus is a clear picture of a halo. In fact, some scholars have stated that all these disciples and the manner in which they are basically put forth and placed create some kind of parallel with the zodiac. You know the signs of the zodiac: Aries, Pisces, Taurus, and so on. And so if you look at if you visited New Age bookshops and so on, you find the same kind of parallels which take place, where all these disciples, in a sense, resemble the so-called zodiac, or the son of the zodiac, which goes to indicate where Leonardo da Vinci came from. And of course, some of the so-called beliefs that he harbored or that he had. Again, we find another indication of the Black Madonna. This is a Black Madonna of Zestochowska, found in Czechoslovakia. Again, the halo, surrounded the halo, which was again a part and parcel of Egyptian sun worship, of pagan worship, worship of the sun god worship. Picture of Jesus, we find the halo again. Here we find a halo. This was an incident where, if you look at the gospel accounts of Matthew and Luke, where the devil commands Jesus to throw himself down and command God to save you. At that particular context, you find the same halo that basically fulfills, again surrounding him in the particular cross itself. T.J. Plunk in 1906 stated that early Christianity was a product of Buddhist missionaries. And so based on that, he stated, look, these kind of developments which take place, they of course evolved at a specific time period, at a particular given point in time. We can go on, influence in other mythologies. Now, there was an incident which occurred in history, and I think it's important to understand that. There were a group of followers of Jesus Christ, or who believed in the original message, and they were called the Apostolic Christians, regarded and described as followers of Jesus, and Barnabas came to be known. A number of scholars. One of them was called Irenaeus. One of his basic beliefs, he stated that, according to him, he believed that God himself was one, and he effectively supported the doctrine of the oneness of God. You see, you find this kind of parallel which takes place throughout all of these three major faiths, and that is that when you look at the Shema, the original creed, found in the book of Deuteronomy, it states in Deuteronomy, the word is Shema Israelu Adna Ilahainu Adna Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The word used is Echad. Some 1,000 years later, after Moses, a scribe comes up to Jesus and questions him, what is your concept of God? And Jesus is made to answer word for word what he said 1,000 years before by Moses. He said, Shema Israelu Adna Ilahainu Adna Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Some 600 years later, a Christian deputation of Najran come to Medina. They spend approximately 3 days in the mosque. They enter into an engagement with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And at a particular given point in time, they state, O Moses, what is your concept of God? And he's made to say, word for word, what Jesus and what Moses said some 1,000 years before. And that is, Shema Israelu Adna Ilahainu Adna Echad, which means in Arabic, Qul huwallahu ahad, say he is God, the one and only. Now, Moses said Echad. Jesus said Ahad. Echad. Muhammad says Ahad. What is the difference? What is the difference between Echad and Ahad? Linguistically, it's the same point, it's the same idea, it's the same belief. And so these particular faiths were one and the same, which we believe is Islam. So Irenaeus was one of the particular apostolic Christians who believed in the original oneness of God and challenged the idea of the Trinity, which was introduced by individuals such as Paul and so on. Here we have a picture, coming back to what I'd said, Apollo, who was the Greek pagan sun god with a halo. Here again you find a picture of the sun which surrounds him. Here we find, what is this? This is the label of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and what's this here? That's NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. What you find the so-called cross and the sun, symbol of the sun. Here you find again the symbol of the sun surrounding the logo in the Central Intelligence Agency. We are watching you, of course they are. This was the Arc de Triomphe in France. And what do you find here under the arc? Here you find a cross. And clearly around it, what do you see? What do you see? You find so-called rays of the sun, which again symbolize pagan sun worship. Interestingly enough, the sun and the cross always, again, through virgin birth. You find similar accounts, the Egyptian goddess Isis and the son Horus. Here you find the Roman Catholic Mary and the incarnate God Jesus, and so on. These were different goddesses in Ephesus. But the point is that there are parallels. So what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a particular kind of a common consciousness amongst various civilizations where they incorporate these particular beliefs, and you find the parallels throughout history. So-called virgin belief. Today you find that Nimrod is worshipped in various symbolic forms. In places such as the Bohemian Grove, in which the owl, or which is a symbol of Moloch, basically is transformed as a particular type of sun god, and many people engage in that particular type of worship. We'll come to that in a minute. But as I stated, if you look at these mother goddesses in histories, all the attributes, for example, that the Babylonians gave to Queen Semiramis, that's this lady here. This is Queen Semiramis, Mary's in prehistory. Scandinavia, you had Disa with the virgin child, conceived with the virgin birth. In Egypt, Isis and the child Osiris. In India, Krishna and Devkasi. In Asia, Cybele and Dionysus. In Rome, you have the mother goddess Fortuna and Jupiter Pio, also all conceived by a virgin birth. In Greece, you have Ceres. You have the fruit juice Ceres, or Irene with a baby boy Plutus, all again conceived through miraculous means. Virgin Marys in prehistory, as I'd like to call them, with the child conceived through miraculous means, through the virgin birth. That particular lady was called in history in certain accounts as Virgin Mother, Queen of Heaven, Our Lady, which translates as Madonna. In other words, if you heard of the Madonna of the Rocks, the actual painting by Da Vinci, and the Notre Dame, and later on those particular writings were transferred into the myths which were created surrounding the Virgin Mary. The Ubaid culture, as I stated previously, worshipped a certain people, and as I showed earlier on, the reptilian mother and child were found in the grave when they were being dug up by respective archaeologists. Unraveling the specific story is fascinating when you begin to realize that the so-called different gods and goddesses around the world are essentially the same deity. Queen Semiramis and Mother Goddess worship, you find the same thing in India. You find the Mother Goddess here, Devkasi, with the infant Krishna.